So, Gillian, let me turn to you as an anthropologist, I must note. We have people saying this is as big as electricity or fire or the invention of the wheel. Are we overestimating what this generative AI may mean for us all?
Well, the reason why the Nvidia stock popped so dramatically and came out with extraordinary earnings is very much down to the dazzle factor, but also the confusion factor, because investors know that something big is happening. They don't really understand the technology. They don't understand the degree to which companies that are AI companies actually have a moat that can defend them from, new rivals. And so there's a lot of uncertainty there. The one thing that's crystal clear, though, is that this is going to require a lot of computing power and a lot of chips. So people are grasping on anything they can see, the shiny new thing, to try and have a play at this whole wave. In terms of the significance of generative AI, it is obviously very significant. We've had AI for a very long time. It's all part of our, everyday experience. But for me, one of the ways to explain what's going on is that as an anthropologist, I always used to joke that the one thing that AI couldn't do is have a sense of humor and tell jokes, because jokes are fundamentally rooted in culture, which is hard to describe and hard to define and often very contradictory. And most of the traditional platforms inside computers looked for logic and patterns and things like that. What you're starting to see with platforms like generative AI are machines that are so sophisticated and so good at watching people and replicating human behavior, even if it's not logical, behaving like an anthropologist, not a scientist, that you're starting to get AI platforms which are almost beginning to tell jokes. So it's really quite a big change in terms of what's happening. The big question, though, is what it means in terms of real-world applications and company valuations.
Well, I think this is good news for my wife, who has always questioned my sense of humor, so maybe I can use ChatGPT to tell some jokes. So Laura, let me turn to you here on how big this could be. Is this a new lease on life for all of tech, essentially? Because we saw tech really get beaten down last year, and now it seems to be coming back.
So look, I think this is another thing you can put in the category of rallies that have been deserved. And I know it's, sort of trendy to go out and say, the market is toppy and this is just all this AI hype and it's not deserved. I think there's a paucity of growth stories out there right now. And when you think about the conversation on reshoring that's been going on, I've been talking to a lot of investors about that in recent months as kind of the only big, interesting growth narrative out there. Well, now we've got something to keep it company, which is AI. Ultimately, my gut is that this is going to be another productivity enhancer, something very cool, something very interesting that enhances productivity. Is it going to completely transform society? I'm not quite sure I'm in that camp. But in terms of the market and why it's getting so excited, I think it's because there hasn't been a lot of other things in this kind of category of secular growth stories to get excited about recently.
Gillian, I'm going to ask you to do something very unfair. You have a terrific column on Friday in the Financial Times about DIIA, I believe it's called, in Ukraine. Could you just give us 30 or 45 seconds on that? Because I thought it was really extraordinary. I'd love you to come back and really explain it in more detail.
Actually, DIA is an app the Ukrainians launched 3 years ago to enable Ukrainian citizens to do all the usual government functions that any of us ever have to do, not by going to an office and filling in paper forms, but on your phone with an app. And initially, it seemed like just a very minor tool that a few people might use for things like vaccination status in COVID. But these days, 70% of Ukrainian phones have this app. Half the population is using it. They're doing almost everything to do with the government on this cell phone app. And the key point is that not only has it meant that Ukraine's kept functioning even as refugees have flooded everywhere, because they've all got their passports and stuff on their phone, but it's also meant that they have one way potentially to try and cut down on corruption. And the crucial thing to understand, the reason why it's so important this week, is because they're trying to take it, the USAID is trying to take it and export it to other countries. And that shows that actually Ukraine is just about agriculture or industry, but maybe, just maybe, it will have a tech sector in the future as well that matters.